Welcome to Aunty K's Tarot, your favorite radical queer Indigenous auntie, bringing you tarot every day. Hello and welcome to Aunty K's Tarot. Today, we are putting this in with chat and cards, but it's really just a chat portion. I have some things to say and I've written it out. Why is Donald Trump attacking the citizenship of Indigenous folks in the Americas under Amendment 14? I know we all like to say he's crazy and does whatever he wants, but he makes calculated decisions, and the people behind him do also. The connections of who is impacted by attacking the birthright citizenship of Indigenous folks in the USA is directly tied to being able to disqualify folks who are Indigenous to all parts of the Americas or seen as Indigenous to all parts of the Americas. The knee-jerk response is to say Indigenous people are the original Americans, but we are not Americans. We are not Canadians. We are not Mexicans. We are not Brazilians. Those are our colonizers. We are Mohawks and Crees and Lakotas and Delaware and Seminole and Mayans and Mapuche and hundreds of more nations. To fight for the Indigenous right to colonial citizenship very quickly ties us into colonial nationalism. Even Trump threatening to make Canada the 51st state poses a possibility of destroying anti-colonial and decolonial movements for colonial protective nationalism. In so-called Canada, Indigenous elders fought against the White Paper. Historically, this was a proposal written by Chrétien under the Trudeau Senior Government 1960. People like to remind everybody that Indigenous elders won the fight and destroyed the White Paper. This isn't an entirely accurate portrayal. The one part of the White Paper that survived was forcing Canadian colonial citizenship on Indigenous people. This part of the narrative is raised so that Canada can proclaim doing the right thing in a time of civil rights and gifting Canadian colonial citizenship to Indigenous people. Except it wasn't a choice and we didn't want it. And the reason our elders in so-called Canada didn't want colonial citizenship is because they saw the impact it had on our people in the so-called USA. It made many of our people see themselves as Americans. We have an opportunity for a colonial stand inside of Trump's calculations. Trump sees the mistake we could all make in writing ourselves into permanent colonial history. He doesn't see how we might oppose it because his assumption is that everyone wants to be an American citizen. This is his failing, and it could be our strength. This is a time to fight for Indigenous nationhood, land back, and the right of Indigenous folks to reside anywhere within the Americas outside of colonial approval and jurisdiction. I found this issue covered in only a few news outlets. First, I'm going to refer to one that was a different anti-colonial attack by MAGA. Katie Halper spoke with an Indigenous land defender in California about how Fox News host Jesse something blamed the Indians in a direct reference to Indigenous folks in California for the fires in California and for Governor Newsom returning land to Indigenous people for what he called stupid fish. Largely, the news is uninterested in Indigenous folks, so that's why I'm including this one. On this issue, specifically with Indigenous citizenship and the 14th Amendment, Modern Warrior on his social media platform mentions Trump's Indigenous folks don't have birthright citizenship issue. Juneau Empire, in an article by Mark Sabatini discusses it poorly. Salon's Russell Payne gives the facts, basically. And Global News Halifax in Nova Scotia, Canada, does a great job for mainstream media. So we will look at that. So this is a picture of the article by Mark Sabatini. And then we're going to look at this article here, Trump's attempt to end birthright citizenship would overturn more than a century of precedents. January 25th, 25. Graham Lee, Viewer, and Jamie, then it gets cut off, I don't know. Some say the legal analogy of the citizens of tribal nations plays directly into that. It's not a valid comparison, says Leo Chavez, a professor and author at the University of California, Irvine, who studies international migration. It's using the heat of race to make a political argument rather than a legal argument. They're digging into old, archaic Indian law cases, finding the most racist points they can in order to win, said Matthew Fletcher, a professor of law at the University of Michigan and a member of the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. There's nothing sacred in the Department of Justice. They'll do anything they can to win. For Spanish and Mexican descendants, in addition to his order on birthright citizenship, Trump has directed immigration arrests to be expanded to sensitive locations such as schools that hold special implications in the border state of New York. Juan argued that he was a citizen because he was born in the U.S. In siding with him, the Supreme Court made explicit that the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment automatically confers citizenship to all U.S.-born people regardless of the parent's status. In its 6-2 decision, the court said that to deny Wong's citizenship because of his parentage would be to deny thousands of persons of English, Scottish, Irish, German, or other European parentage who have always been considered and treated as citizens of the United States. The ruling was a huge relief for the Chinese community, as there was evidence that others were being denied entry, said Bill Ong King, a professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law. They carried birth certificates and applied for passports proving they were born in the U.S. All the Supreme Court concentrated on was, are you subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S.? President Donald Trump has said his first administration that he wants to end birthright citizenship, a constitutional right for everyone born in the United States. This week, he issued an executive order that would eliminate it, upending more than a century of precedent. On Thursday, however, a federal judge temporarily blocked it after 22 states quickly mounted a legal challenge. Over the years, the right to citizenship has been won by various oppressed or marginalized groups after hard-fought legal battles. Here's a look at how birthright citizenship has applied to some of those cases and how the Justice Department is using them today to defend Trump's order. Citizenship for Native Americans. Native Americans were given U.S. citizenship in 1924. The Justice Department has cited their status as a legal analogy to justify Trump's executive order in court, arguing that birth in the United States does not by itself entitle a person to citizenship. The person must also be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. It raises a case from 1884 that found members of Indian tribes are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and are not constitutionally entitled to citizenship, the department said. Many scholars take a dim view of the validity of that analogies. It's not a good or even new legal argument, said Gerald A. Newman, a professor of international, foreign, and comparative law at Harvard Law School, but it's got a bigger political movement behind it, and it's embedded in a degree of openly expressed xenophobia and prejudice. All persons born or nationalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. The 14th Amendment says no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. that effectively nullified the Dred Scott ruling. For children of immigrants, all children born in the U.S. to immigrants have the right to citizenship thanks to a Chinese man who landed in 1998. Case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco to parents from China, but when he tried to return to the U.S. after a visit to the country, the government denied him entry under the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which restricted immigration from China and barred Chinese immigrants from ever becoming U.S. citizens. The state's 1912 Constitution includes a guarantee saying children of Spanish descent in the state of New Mexico shall never be denied the right and privilege of administration and attendance to public schools, and they shall never be classed in separate schools, but shall forever enjoy perfect equality with other children. State Attorney Gerald Raul Torres has highlighted that provision in guidance to K-12 schools about how to respond to possible surveillance warrants and subpoenas by immigration authorities. The guidance notes that children cannot be denied access to public education based on immigration status, citing U.S. Supreme Court precedent. For enslaved people, the issue of whether enslaved people were eligible for U.S. citizenship came to the forefront in 1857, where the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 against Dred Scott, a slave, in his bid to sue for freedom. In their decision, the court said black people were not entitled. Heng was among Chinese American leaders who criticized Trump's order during a news conference Friday at the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association in San Francisco's Chinatown. The association helped Wong with his legal case. Annie Lee, policy director of Chinese for Affirmative Action, said that Trump's executive order affects all immigrants and children of immigrants, regardless of legal status. When a racist man screams at me to go back to my country, he does not know or care if I am a U.S. citizen, if I am here on a work visa, or if I am undocumented, she says. He looks at me and feels like I do not belong here. So make no mistake that the white supremacy which animates this illegal executive order impacts us all. Associated Press writer Morgan Lee in Santa Fe, New Mexico contributed. All right, so this was the best of the articles, but none of them cover the implications. What could this enable Trump to do to Indigenous folks? They fail to see the ties to how it is meant to exclude the umbrella of Latino. How it is meant to exclude the umbrella of Latino. They don't, and I say that because there's not a Latino race. There are settlers and Indigenous folks and the descendants of enslaved black folks and refugees in so-called Latin America, same as in, English America. Okay, and that's the point. It makes sure it lumps that all together. Okay, they don't mention Indigenous folks being arrested by ICE for looking like migrants, and they don't discuss the impacts on colonialism versus decolonization. We need to discuss these things and respond in a way that benefits all world Indigenous and hopefully undermines the settler colony. We can only save this land by destroying the USA and the rest of the continent's colonies and the globe's colonies. Okay, so I don't support BRICS because it includes settler colonies, which must also be destroyed for full land back and Indigenous governance nation by nation. I know this is a scary time, but this is also a hopeful time because we have the opportunity to fight the fights we have long needed to fight. Those of us who are Indigenous in the USA and Canada, we are part of the global North. We really need to have these fights where we define ourselves as colonized or as still Indigenous in opposition to colonialism. The world is changing, and we can't stop that or delay it with neoliberal votes any longer. but we can direct what we want to have in place for what comes next. We can oppose the next order as it begins. And since its beginnings are here and now, before this empire falls, this is the time to make sure it can't rebuild in its new image. If you want to bring down millionaires and billionaires and also the micro elite, because they're always pro-colonial and racist, we want to bring down both the oligarchy and the micro elites, because yes, they both must fall for settler colonialism to fall. Settler colonialism, the oligarchs rely on the micro elites, and like it or not, they rely on that upper middle class. So they are not our allies. I'm sorry, class conscious folks. Maybe if you're white, you see them as your allies, but they are not the allies of black and brown folks. They are not. They are not. Okay. We must destroy their settler colonies so they don't have them in place to build their new economic order. I don't know what that economic order is or what the future will call it. But for now, I'm going to call it capitalism 2.0 or capitalism transition. We determine if what comes... We have a role in determining what comes next. We do. And what we build here and now as this empire falls, and how we fight against this empire as it falls, determines whether or not alternatives have a fighting chance, and how we as Indigenous people fight against this Trump's Indigenous people don't have birthright citizenship question is really important for ourselves, for other Indigenous people in the Americas, and for world Indigenous people. See you later, folks.